Our next storyteller knows this landscape very well, not from an artist point of view. So far you've heard from 2 artists from our Spirit of the Land exhibition, but now you're going to hear from Todd Esque. He's an ecologist that works for the Western Ecological Research Center. That's part of the U.S. Geological Survey. And Todd's work focuses on understanding how organisms, habitats, and ecosystem processes respond to environmental change. Sounds like something we really need to talk about in terms of this mega drought and climate change right now. So come on up, Todd. You are our next contestant in storytelling.
Thank you. So I'm honored for the privilege of speaking about my experience doing science in Ivy Kwame. There's a lot more to doing science than just writing papers, and I'd like to share some of those ideas with you tonight. It's a little different kind of talk for me, but I've enjoyed putting it together. My first adventure in the greater Ivy Kwame area was in 1983 when I studied desert tortoises near Kalnavari for the Nevada Department of Wildlife. I worked with my friend Paul. Paul was the most eccentric person I have ever met. We traveled in his 1942 jalopy pickup truck with all his earthly belongings, the food, the clothing, his library, hawk traps, plant press, jar of poisonous mushrooms from Mexico, bars of silver, and animal specimens in the most loose of terms. Our camp was in the bottom of Paiute Wash on Carl Weichel's cattle allotment. He was nice to us and visited us weekly just to see what the 2 crazy enviros were up to. Paul put up a big Coleman tent, and right away a black widow moved in to the corner of the tent. Paul said if we pushed her out, another one would just move in, so we might as well get along with the one that lives here. I slept under the stars for the next 2 months and was glad to have a little distance from the known spider. Off to one side of the tent was a shoebox that I buried as a home for some tiny ground squirrels to live in, and I rescued them from a badger. We fed them roadkill from the highway, and they thrived. So we lived close to the land, and Paul shared all kinds of knowledge about nature during our days of searching for tortoises from dark to dark. We worked on a population study for desert tortoises, and we were trying to understand whether their populations were stable, or increasing, or decreasing, and documenting everything else we could learn about them. So we measured and marked the live tortoises, and we collected the dead ones. And we found so many dead tortoises in that little area that we could fill 3 cardboard moving boxes that year. We declared it a die-off, and nobody had seen anything like that before, and people still wonder about it. But now we know that die-offs like that happen locally in the desert and usually are linked with drought and disease outbreaks. There's something else about the desert tortoise ecology that bothered me out there. Because in Arizona, all the tortoise habitats I studied were in big rocky outcrops, like Ivy Kwame. But on this side of the river, Paul was adamant that we would study them in the simmering valley bottom. And he said that it was just that way over here, and there was no torts up in the mountains. So every time we went to the city for resupply, I would look up at Spirit Mountain and start talking to Paul about how I thought there must be tortoises out there, and we would argue all the way to the city and back. That was Paul's last season on this earth. I carried his knowledge and that he shared with me, and kept wondering about tortoises in the hills for decades. So 30 years later, we have computers and satellites to give us new insights into nature, and it helps us a lot. I led a project to model habitat suitability for desert tortoises across the entire Mojave Desert. And I got kind of carried away with the big picture. I forgot about that question. There was a biologist working for a solar company that looked over the modeling. He said, hey, your model says there's tortoises up in those rocky hills. And so it did, right there in front of me, but I had forgotten. So he said, if I could get funding, would your team want to go out and verify that? I said, oh boy, that was great. So we did. And we found that the densest population of desert tortoises in Nevada was living up in those rocky hills. And there are tortoises every size and lots of little ones, which makes a person happy when you see that sort of thing. The genes from those tortoises, we learned, from up there on the Rocky Ridge and the McCullough Mountains, were flowing out across El Dorado Valley, right out toward Mystery Ranch, and then the other way, over into Ivanpah Valley to California, to connect all with other populations, as they always had. And so my point is, in Ave Kwame, there's still room to sit quietly in the warm desert wind and watch for storms on the horizon while the stars turn overhead and think long, deep thoughts about nature. And there's still time to learn nature's secrets out there, solve science problems, and remember friends. With protection, this place will continue to reveal its knowledge to the other seekers. Thank you.